Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt. I write and perform this podcast. If you'd like to support the show, I'm a children's author, so you can buy a book by me, or you can buy me a coffee by going to buymeacoffee.com/storiesrasprat. It's an easy way to make a small thank you gift to the show so I can keep kicking this can down the road. The podcast directory you're using right now should have a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the show notes, or you can type it into your browser. That's buymeacoffee.com/storiesrasprat. All contributions are gratefully appreciated. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Well, it's the first day of winter here in Australia. Well, in this part of Australia anyway. It's a bit nippy, a bit cold, but it's not too bad yet. The fish pond hasn't frozen over yet. So it's quite nice, beautiful blue day. So let's just get into it. A couple of weeks ago when I was doing events, one of the kids, I was saying, has anybody got suggestions for stories? And someone said, Ned Kelly. You've never done Ned Kelly. And I thought, that's true. Ned Kelly is a bit of a legendary story. It's famous all around the world. At one stage, Mick Jagger played, from the Rolling Stones. Actually, you probably don't know the Rolling Stones because you're kids. He was a famous rock star from the 60s. He played Ned Kelly in a 1970s version of Ned Kelly in a movie. And I think there'd been like 4 Hollywood films about Ned Kelly. So I thought that's a good idea. So I did the research, and that's what this week's episode is going to be about. So let's get into it. Ned Kelly's Last Stand, according to Nanny Piggins. Here we go. What did you learn about today at school? Nanny Piggins asked the children as they walked home from school with Boris. Well, we did algebra, said Derek. Oh, you poor boy, said Nanny Piggins. And we studied river tributaries, said Samantha. Oh, it's a miracle you didn't slip into a coma. Yeah, and we learned about bushrangers, said Michael. Nanny Piggins gasped. Oh, finally, your school has decided to teach you something useful. Were they practical lessons? Did they focus on technique? How to ride a horse? How to ride a horse while screaming threats? How to ride a horse while screaming threats and brandishing weapons? That sort of thing? Or did you just jump in the deep end and hold up a stagecoach? In which case, where did you find a stagecoach in this day and age? I suppose a FedEx van or an Uber would be the closest equivalent. Personally, I'd hold up an ice cream van. Ice cream sellers don't wear much jewellery and they don't carry bank deposits. But if I did have those sorts of things, I would only use them to buy ice cream, or perhaps cake, so I might as well cut out the middleman. No, we didn't learn how to be a bushranger, explained Michael. We learned about famous bushrangers from history. Oh, said Nanny Piggins, trying to hide her disappointment. Well, I suppose that's okay too. Were there at least diagrams in the books so you could figure it out for yourself? Oh, there were photos of the bushrangers, said Michael. Well, that's something, I suppose, said Nanny Piggins. Yeah, so we learned about Australia's most famous bushranger, Ned Kelly, said Michael. Really, said Nanny Piggins. Ned Kelly? Ned Kelly is famous. Are we talking about the same Ned Kelly? The Ned Kelly from the 1800s in rural Victoria? Yeah, that's the one, said Michael. And you're telling me Ned Kelly is famous for being a bushranger? Yeah, Ned Kelly's famous all around the world, said Derek. There have been lots of Hollywood movies about Ned Kelly and the Siege of Glenrowan, and everyone knows the famous armour. It's very distinctive looking. Astonishing, said Nanny Piggins. In our family, Ned Kelly is better known for her toffee recipe. What? Said Samantha. It's crackingly good, said Nanny Piggins. Her family were from Ireland, you see, and the Irish have a gift for making toffee. It's got to do with all the rain in Ireland. The rain makes the grass grow, the cows eat the grass, the cows produce beautiful cream and butter are the primary ingredients in making really good toffee. Yeah, I get that, said Derek, but you're going to have to go back a bit and explain, because this is the first we've heard about Ned Kelly being a woman. Yeah, are you sure, Nanny Piggins, said Michael, because our teacher said that Ned was short for Edward. Pish! What a load of waffle pots, said Nanny Piggins. Edward, indeed. Ridiculous. No, Ned was short for Stephanie. Stephanie, said Samantha. Yes, Ned Kelly's real name was Stephanie Kelly Piggins, said Nanny Piggins. But Ned isn't short for Stephanie, said Michael. Yes, it is, said Nanny Piggins. There's an N and an E in Stephanie. But there's no D in it, said Derek. Well, there's no K in Michael, but people shorten Michael to Mike, said Nanny Piggins. Besides, have you ever seen how the Irish spell their names? No, said Derek. Well, let me tell you, when it comes to spelling, the Irish are very creative, said Nanny Piggins. If you ever do meet an Irish person called Aoife, Siobhan, Colleen, or Shane, or Saoirse, ask them how they spell their name and prepare to be shocked. OK, said Derek. He was still not 100% convinced, but he sensed a story was coming, and he'd rather hear a story than have a spelling lesson. So you're saying that Ned Kelly, the famous bushranger with the famous armour, was a woman, a relative of yours, and, I'm guessing, a pig? Of course, said Nanny Piggins. Ned Kelly did live in a rural area. I know you're accustomed to me, a pig who chooses to live in the suburbs, or a circus tent roaming the world as a superstar. But actually, the majority of pigs do live on farms in rural areas. I suppose so, said Derek. There was some sort of logic there. You'd better tell us the whole story, said Samantha. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins. But we'll have to change direction. We can't keep walking home. Why not? Asked Michael. Well, we need to stop at the sweet shop, of course, said Nanny Piggins. If you're going to hear the tale of my legendary relative, Ned Kelly, you're going to need an Irish toffee by the time we get to the end of it. So the children stuffed their school bags in a bush to pick up later, turned around and started walking in the direction of the sweet shop, and Nanny Piggins began her tale. The key thing you need to understand about the story of Ned Kelly is that she was Irish, said Nanny Piggins. She was born in Ireland then, said Michael. Actually, no, said Nanny Piggins. She was born in Australia, but her family were Irish, and that is very important, because Irish people and English people did not get along back then, particularly the type of Irish people who were in Australia, because many of them had come to Australia as transported convicts. And there's nothing like sending someone to the other side of the planet and forcing them to do hard labour to make them grumpy. Which is what happened to Ned Kelly's father. He'd been sentenced to transportation for the crime of stealing 2 pigs. But he was a pig, said Derek. Yes, but pignapping was not a crime in the 1800s, so he was convicted of stealing and sent to Australia. When he got there, he married Ellen. They had 8 children, the 3rd eldest being Ned, a.k.a. Stephanie Kelly. And then Ned's father died. How sad, said Boris. Yes, it was sad, said Nanny Piggins, but Ned's dad was a bit of a rotter. He had a touch of the Bramwell about him, so we won't dwell on it. Meanwhile, Ellen, the mother, was left looking after 8 children in remote regional Victoria in a time when there was no ice cream vans, no cake shops, and not even frozen yogurt. Oh, my heart hurts. This is all so tragic. Yes. Luckily, Ellen was very good at making Irish toffee and taught her children the craft, so they didn't starve to death. This was a time when the wealthy English landowners prospered and the poor Irish former convicts struggled. And the police were not as nice back then as our lovely police sergeant is today. So Ned got in trouble. What for? Asked Samantha. Oh, we learned about this bit, said Michael. It was for stealing a horse. Well, that's what the courts say, but Ned preferred to think of it as horse liberating. Ned was very big on liberating things, horses, money, toffee ingredients, really anything that wasn't nailed down. Ned also enjoyed a good bout of fisticuffs. You see, these days, when young people feel those urges, they can join a martial arts club and roll around on the floor doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which to me just looks like an elaborate excuse for hugging each other. But there was no Brazilian jiu-jitsu in 1800s Victoria, so Ned got into fisticuffs with police officers instead. And one thing led to another. Things escalated, and at the age of 15, Ned got sentenced to 3 years hard labour. Tried as an adult? Exclaimed Samantha. Yes, well, 15 was an adult back in the 1800s, especially if you were poor and Irish. After serving her sentence, Ned got out of jail and went back home. And after all that back-breaking labour, she was even more short-tempered and cross than before. 3 years of prison food will do that to you. You know, the quality of cakes they serve in penal institutions is lamentable. I know it's meant to be punishment, but torture is wrong. Anyway, Ned went back to her mother's farm. Farming, asked Samantha. Well, there were 8 children and several grandchildren at that stage, said Nanny Piggins. They didn't all need to be working in the farm at the same time. They would have been bumping into each other and getting in each other's way. So no, Ned concentrated on liberating horses. I know stealing is wrong, but Ned was good at it, and it's important to cultivate your talents. Anyway, Ned came home one night after a long day of liberating and walked in on a brawl going on inside her family home. What happened? Asked Michael. Well, a police officer called Fitzpatrick had turned up to arrest Ned, probably for some more horse liberating. Anyway, his mum, Ellen, had cunningly invited the police officer to sit down and eat dinner with them. And while this police officer was eating his 5th helping of delicious Irish apple cake, he said something disrespectful to Ned's sister, Kate. What did he say? Asked Michael. No one knows, said Nanny Piggins, because it was too rude to write down. But Kate slapped him, then Dan, their brother, punched him, and then their mother, Ellen, bashed the police officer about the back of the head with a coal shovel. So I'm guessing what he said was pretty bad. And that is when Ned walked in. She saw Kate crying, blood pouring out of Dan's nose, and her mother waving about a coal shovel. Ned was horrified, and she fired a warning shot into the police officer's wrist. "Ow!" cried the police officer. "What did you do that for?" "How dare you assault my mother?" cried Ned. "I'm not assaulting her, she's assaulting me," protested the police officer. "Well, he put a dent in my shovel with the back of his head," accused Mother Kelly. Luckily, the bullet wound in the police officer's wrist was not terribly serious. Ballistics were not very sophisticated back then. Plus, Ned was not a good shot. She'd only clipped his wrist. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Ned as she bandaged up the wound. "It was an honest mistake. I'm a bit short-tempered, I'm afraid. When I do see someone in a fistfight with my mother, I do tend to overreact. You're not going to tell anyone about this, are you?" The police officer looked at the large Kelly family standing over him. Of course not," said the police officer. So Ned walked the officer back to his horse and made sure he got home safely. But the police officer was lying. He raced back to the police station and reported the whole thing. The following morning, the police officer came back with a big gang of fellow police officers, and they arrested Ellen and Dan. "Why didn't they arrest Ned?" asked Samantha. "Well, Ned was out that day," said Nanny Piggins. "Liberating horses?" asked Derek. "Possibly," said Nanny Piggins. "In fact, probably. It's what she did most days." When Ned found out her mother had been arrested, she was outraged. And when Ellen was sentenced to 3 years hard labour, the entire Irish population of Victoria, and a lot of the non-Irish population, was outraged too, that the police would arrest a poor, struggling, single mother of 8 children. She was a grandmother as well. They couldn't believe the police would lock up a granny. "It does sound harsh," said Samantha. "Ah, indeed. You see, the police back in 1800s Victoria were not the nicest fellows, especially not to former convicts or poor people. So all the poor people got excited that the Kelly gang was standing up to the police." "It does seem cruel to sentence a grandmother to hard labour," said Samantha. "Yes, but you have to remember, Ellen had married young. Ned was only 23 at the time, and Ellen was only 46, and she worked hard all her life. I'm pretty sure if you got bashed about the head with a shovel by her, you'd feel it. She would have had impressive upper body strength." Anyway, from that point on, Ned decided if the government were going to be unfair, then she would be unfair too, and she embarked on a life of crime. "Oh dear," said Boris. "Yes," said Nanny Piggins. "Crime is a nasty business, and unfortunately it is often glamorised in the media." "Did they have media back in the 1800s?" asked Derek. "Well, they had stories, and one story in particular, the story of Robin Hood, was very inspirational to any poor people thinking about stealing from the rich, which is what Ned and her gang began to do. They started robbing banks and sharing the money with local poor people. Now, obviously, robbing banks is wrong. And more than that, it's foolish in this modern day when banks have bandit screens, CCTV and armed guards. But back when Ned did it, she would go into the town that had the bank and tell all the local poor people what she was going to do. Now, the poor people didn't like the police or the rich people, so they'd all be on her side. So robbing a bank wasn't terribly hard, not if the teller starts throwing the money over the counter at you as soon as you walk in the door. Unfortunately, the police did not see it that way. You know what police are like. They do insist on arresting criminals. Even our own dear police sergeant will arrest a pig if she accidentally eats a few hundred cakes that aren't hers after breaking into the Slimbridge cake factory. So 4 police officers set out into the bush to find Ned and the Kelly gang. And a gunfight ensued, which did not go well for the police officers because the Kelly gang were better at aiming their guns. Now Ned was in a lot of trouble. She was declared an outlaw and an £8,000 reward was placed on her head. Just her head? Asked Michael. Well, the head was the main bit, said Nanny Piggins. The authorities wanted her to be brought in dead or alive, and they did not mind which. They probably secretly preferred dead. It would be safer for them when she got there. Ned was very upset about it all. She wrote a long letter about how the police were rotters and that working people should rise up and overthrow the government. But Ned was only 24 years old, and she didn't really know how to overthrow government. She did, however, know how to rob a bank. So that's what she did. She went to Glenrowan and captured the hotel, taking everyone inside hostage. Oh, that's awful, said Boris. Actually, it wasn't. It was a bit of a party. They had drinks and food that they shared with the hostages. There was even dancing. Kelly gang even put on a show, performing horse riding tricks, just to pass the time while they were waiting for the police to show up, which the police did. But they did not come to hand over government to Ned Kelly. They came to arrest her. "Come out with your hands up, Kelly," demanded the police. "No," said Ned Kelly. She had a way with words. She also had a secret weapon. She knew the police would shoot her at the first chance because she was a wanted outlaw and everyone wanted the £8,000 reward. So she needed armour. "Oh, I know this bit," said Michael, and she made her famous armour and helmet out of plough blades. What? No, she didn't. Ned Kelly grew up on a farm. She knew plough blades were too important. They were needed as plough blades. No, she made her armour out of a much more practical material that they had in abundance. She made her armour out of Irish toffee. Her family had brought the recipe out from Ireland and had been secretly making it to cheer themselves up about living in abject poverty. So over a bush fire, she'd crafted her armour. There was a big, thick plate of toffee covering her chest, another big, thick plate on her back, a thick plate hanging above her thighs, and a huge helmet like a giant bucket with a slit to see through, all made out of hard Irish toffee. The police didn't realise at first they were shooting at the Kelly gang through the windows of the Glenrowan Hotel. But eventually the police grew fed up because they weren't coming out, so they set fire to the hotel to get the gang to come outside. Ned knew this was her last chance. She made her counter-attack at the police. Dressed from head to knee in her armour, she strode towards the police officers like a one-woman pedestrian tank. She had a handgun in each hand, and she was shooting at the police as they shot at her. And the armour worked. Ned was shot 28 times on the armour, and not one of those shots passed through to her skin. "Hooray!" said the children. Unfortunately, her lower legs and her arms were not covered in toffee armour, and she was also shot 18 times there, and that was way more owie. Eventually, after the 18 wounds, Ned collapsed, and she was arrested. She spent a month in hospital recovering from all the gunshot wounds, which is actually an amazingly short amount of time to bounce back completely from 18 gunshot wounds, and then Ned was tried in court by the same judge who had sentenced her mother to jail. The judge was very cross by this stage with the whole Kelly family, and Ned was sentenced to hang. Ned was very philosophical about it, and her last words were, "Such is life." "Oh, how sad," said Samantha. "Oh, not at all," said Nanny Piggins. "You see, as luck would have it, the person who supplied the rope for the hanging was Irish and secretly a Kelly supporter. So the rope he supplied was entirely made of licorice. Ned was able to eat her way through, escape from the gallows and make her way back to Ireland, where she gave up her life of crime, changed her name to Cleves and set up a factory that became the world's biggest manufacturer of Irish toffee. The end. Time for bed." "Is that true?" asked Michael. "Yeah, that's not the story we learned in history," said Derek. "Yes, but what is truth?" asked Nanny Piggins. "The facts of what really happened," said Samantha. Well, even the people who were there at the time couldn't agree about what that was, so it would be silly for us to worry about it now. Oh, look, we're here. The children realised they were standing outside the sweet shop. Sebastian, a kilo of your finest Irish toffee for us each, please, for historical reasons. And we'll end it there. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. That's it for now. Until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.